Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida Department of Criminal Justice, and I wanted to talk about an article written by Professor Richard Rosenfeld and published in Criminology 2018, Volume 56, Number 1, pages 5 to 26, and this is the 2017 Sutherland Address. So this is in the Criminology Journal, which you may find in the UCF online library. This is one of the leading journals in criminology and criminal justice. And this is a fascinating article because Professor Rosenfeld addresses an issue where we don't really have clear answers, and we're still working on trying to explain what happened. The title of the article is Studying Crime Trends, Normal Science and Exogenous Shocks. So what happens here is an analysis of homicide patterns and trends, and then attempts to explain why we have seen this increase in homicide in 2015 and in 2016. So Professor Rosenfeld starts by talking about normal science used to study crime trends, and one of the things that we've seen often used is economic models related to violent crimes or property crimes, and he talks about the use of the Consumer Sentiment Index, which looks at factors such as the current financial situation, financial situation currently compared to last year, and also the expectations of change in financial status the following year. And what he finds is that there's a relationship between the Consumer Sentiment Index and acquisitive crimes. And also he finds a relationship between acquisitive crimes, we're talking about property crimes here, and also homicide and other violent crimes. So this doesn't surprise us. For years and years and years we've talked about how crime rates are related to economic conditions. But Professor Rosenfeld points out that in 2008 we saw the Great Recession, and everything went chaotic in terms of the crime rates fell. They didn't go up, and all of these economic models, these socioeconomic status, these consumer sentiment index models, these models failed. And all of a sudden we have what Thomas Kuhn would refer to in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions as a crisis. Because we don't know what happened. Our models don't work anymore, do they? And then so we saw in 2014 to 2015, we saw an 11.4 increase in the homicide rate. And also bringing in some more recent data, we see an increase in 2016 as well. Interestingly enough, we saw some increases occur in big cities, and also some decreases occur in big cities, and relatively minor changes in other large cities. And so then we have to ask, well, why? What's going on here? And Professor Rosenfeld looked at two exogenous shocks: the increase in police community tensions, also known perhaps as the Ferguson effect, and secondly, the increase in the illicit drug market for heroin as well as synthetic opioids, which leads to basically the opioid epidemic that we have seen for a while now. In the article, he points out that the Ferguson effect really was still a question, but then more recent research that he has presented, he says that that is probably not this police community tensions or Ferguson effect that led to higher homicide rates. What he did find is that the opioid epidemic and the expanding drug market seemed to be related to the increase in homicides, and accounted for around 22% of the increase in homicides in 2015. So here we're talking about the expansion of drug markets, an increase in drug-related violence, and also we saw an increase among homicide among whites. So that maybe part of this explanation is due to the heroin epidemic, the opioid epidemic, and something that some of us have been predicting we would see, and we started predicting that years ago. I know I have a policy analysis video out there made, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, where I talk about how we're going to see this epidemic based on faulty policies at the time. And Rosenfeld talks about how we need to look at city and neighborhood level studies. And so there's certainly a lot more questions that we need to address. My recommendation is to continue to carry out the quantitative analysis of crime patterns and trends using the models similar to Dr. Rosenfeld. But in addition, I believe that we should conduct intense qualitative case studies and comparative analysis of the cities that have seen higher homicide rates and lower homicide rates, as well as those that didn't have much change, to try to figure out what's going on. And we may have to even get that even more narrowed to the neighborhood level in trying to figure out all of this, because I think there's some hidden factors or variables that not hiding, but we haven't identified, or we haven't gone after those variables in our analysis yet. So if you want, you of course can read the article from Criminology, but also I wanted to mention, if you go to the National Institute of Justice website, you can find 2 reports by Richard Rosenfeld and his colleagues on homicide trends and patterns and the explanations. So those are really some excellent reports you can readily get from the National Institute of Justice. And by the way, the spelling of Rosenfeld is R-O-S-E-N-F-E-L-D. So that's Richard Rosenfeld. So you can find that at the National Institute of Justice website, easily searching that site, which has a wealth of information and studies and papers on different types of crime. Being a qualitative researcher and focusing on violentization theory, my thought on that is that in some of these cities, we've seen an increase in the violentization process in communities becoming less organized, more chaotic, and more violent, with a large push from the illegal drug markets. So I think we're seeing some consistency if we look at micro and macro theories, as well as quantitative and qualitative studies. But we have to put that all together. And of course, we have to come up with some sensible policies, which may be multiple-pronged approaches to addressing, increased violence, illegal drug markets, opioid addictions, treatment programs, and so on. And so a lot to think about there, and certainly a lot to work on. And this wraps up this video.